All right, just a quick one here. This is just talking about working with video, whether it's a recorded video or something you rendered. And if you have a little bit of graininess or noise in it, let's just take a look at it here. This is just a rendering I did with Puppy Ray, and I didn't do the very high number of rendering passes for anti-aliasing. So at first look, it looks fairly decent, but there is a little bit of noise and graininess, especially in the darker areas here. You can see it when you zoom in. You can see there's quite a bit of noise actually. And so one way to fix that to some extent is to basically blend two or three neighboring frames together. Basically saying, okay, if nothing is moving, there won't be much ghosting or trails or anything like that, but it will kind of average it out if we let it, if we in fact use the ghosting filter. So that may have a little side effect on ghosting with where we actually do have some noise or some animation, and but it's noisy enough that it doesn't matter too much, and it probably wouldn't be so destructive. So let's see how that works. I have a stored copy here. I'm going to restore it, and so here's my animation, 105 frames. I actually initially only rendered like 25 or so, and then I made it loopable and repeated the whole thing. You can select an area or the whole thing and copy that block and also then insert it. So if you make it loopable in one session for 25 frames, you can then select that entire group and insert it a few times, so you have 3, 4 times that many frames. And so that's what I did here, and I now have something that's reasonably good looking in terms of a continuous looping animation. But it has this little issue with the rendering. I was greedy. I didn't have time. It's a slow machine. I didn't render it with 200, 300 frames or anti-aliasing passes, only about 100. And so that's one of the things you get as a drawback. You get done faster, but you have a quality that suffers a little bit. And so luckily, there are some ways to fix that. Well, to some extent, right? So one thing we'll do is we'll simply go to the timeline. Let's go stop that. Let's go to the timeline. And with the timeline editor, there's a bunch of filters that are keyframeable. What I'm going to do is go down to the animated group at the very bottom, and you see the ghosting filter. So with the ghosting filter, essentially, it's going to let you say how many frames you want to ghost, right? And that's something you usually use when you actually have an object that where you want to show some sort of a ghosting, like a motion blur based on its path or its movement from frame to frame, and how many frames you want to trail to have that ghosting effect on it. Well, here, one of the side effects is if it's actually not moving, but it's just showing this noise. One of the side effects of that is that it will average those. It will ghost them and gradually and basically make them seem to disappear. So I'm going to go with 5 for the number of frames, and I'm going to go with save undo just in case I didn't like it and I want to go back. Right. So now let's apply that. This is one of the rare filters that actually goes backwards. It goes from the very end of the frame sequence to the first. And the last 4 or 5, whatever the number is here, will not actually be properly ghosted because it doesn't have anything beyond that. Right? Once it reaches the very first frame, it would like to continue ghosting what's there on ahead of it, but there is nothing. But that's okay. The important thing is that we wanted to see what did it do for the noise, and I think it's pretty much reduced already. Right. Now I'm gonna go and exaggerate it a little bit just so as to better see that. Maybe I'm gonna go with 10 levels and apply that one more time. So now it's averaging even more frames. The pixels, pixel for pixel, every pixel in these 10 frames are being ghosted. And so they may not be moving, but they are changing. That's the noise. They're basically changing in brightness. But doing this averaging, this ghosting effect is making sure that it's actually becoming less and less visible. And so if I'm zooming in here now and I play it, you can barely see any noise. Right. There's a little bit of a jump at the very beginning of the animation. Boom, right there. Right. You can see if I go to the last one and then go back to the first frame, there you can see the very first frame is not ghosted, is not smoothed. But then the more I advance, one frame at a time, frame number 2, number 3, number 4, it gets better and better. So that's where you could also then say, well, let's just delete 1 or 2 frames, or go back to what is it called, make loopable, right? You could do a right click and make loopable and say how many frames you want to sacrifice for that. I would say let's just delete a few of these. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. See if that's already better. Yeah, totally. Okay. Yep. All right, and then of course the last thing we need to check here is whether we also have still a pretty good wave movement with the water. That is being ghosted now, right? So that is of course the drawback. Doing the ghosting, sometimes you want that benefit, but sometimes you do have a little bit of a subdued brightness there, or an averaging, right? It's less intense than it used to be. That's lesser contrast, and you could adjust that again. You could go and select the area where the contrast needs to be refined again or increased. So you could do something like even a sharpening based on the depth, right? I mean, the simplest way would be something with the selection fader. uh, you could basically use that to say, let's select everything in the front here, but then deselect to the back, or maybe not that much. Let's go something like this, a little bit sharper, and then also a little bit more here, and basically work it into a selection mask, which you can see. You can store the mask here, store the selection, and you can see that selection mask, and basically only sharpen it in this area, or adjust the contrast, or whatever might be useful here. For instance, adjust with the curve tool. Let's go adjust the contrast there a little bit darker, a little bit brighter. Do a little S curve, and then that way you have a bit of an increase in the coloration or in the contrast. Another thing you could do, and make sure you animate that. Don't do it just on this one frame, but across all frames, right? This is what PD Howler gives you. PD Artist doesn't work on animation sequences or video, but with one exception. You can have a video loaded into your brush and have an anim brush, an animator brush. But with Howler, you also have these tools to work on short video clips. And let's see, one more thing we could do is perhaps re-increase a little bit on the sharpening. This one, let's do the digital photo enhance, and definitely have that in the front. Maybe not too much. This is probably too much. Let's go a little bit less than that. A little bit more or less on the color smooth, and again apply that on the animation. And by the way, most of these filters, you also still have this option for side-by-side look, right? You can see the left and the right side with or without the effect that you're currently working on here, and apply to all frames. Okay, that. So now all frames are being sharpened, but the mask is present across all of them, and so the filtering or the sharpening is happening only in this area in the front nearby. All right, so that's it for this quick little one on how to perhaps de-noise, reduce the noise in video where there is not too much focus on moving parts, and you do want to reduce that pixelation or noise that you may see. And that's something you can see with real video too. You record something in low light or high sensitivity film settings, but of course also here when you rendered it in Puppy Ray, a dog waffle directly. Or in other environments that use a similar rendering technology. So here we go now. We are done with this. Right? I'm going to store this animation. I mean, so certainly one thing you'll want to do is to export it as an MP4 or a WMV, save it as an AVI. But you can also store it simply if you're still working with it. I'm going to store it to disk so it doesn't use much RAM. And that way I have a comparison I can take. I can look at this one here that's now enhanced, right, and doesn't have much noise. Look at how lean that thing is in the background now. There's just no more noise visible, right? And then compare that to the original, and there it is. Look at how noisy that one was. All right, let's go back to the improved one and play it, baby.